I don't personally want the NCAA to be disbanded, right? I think there is value in a collectiveness that occurs across this country in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the student athlete experience. But, I certainly would believe that there will be a group of people that want to scrap it all, start over, and then those who don't want anything to change. I think the danger, though, is if we don't evolve, then we're going to have to deal with the consequences that comes from not wanting to engage in that side of the conversation.
All right, the MIAA A-Game show back again this week, right before Christmas and the holiday break for everybody. Commissioner Mike Racy with me, as well as the president of Northwest Missouri State, Dr. Lance Tatum. Sir, thank you for coming on and putting up with us, probably more me than Commissioner Racy, but thank you for coming on and talking with us for a few minutes here today.
My pleasure, Chris, and go Bearcats.
Commissioner Racy and I probably go everybody, right?
That's right.
go MIAA.
Yeah, go everybody. Everybody gets to have fun out there, right? Let's kind of diving right into this. Relatively new to the Northwest presidency position here the last couple of years for you, but just how has everything gone for you taking over and leading Northwest here into the future as well?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's been an incredible transition for my wife, Jill, and I. Maryville, the Northwest Missouri region, they've just really accepted us with open arms. It's been great to finally have some time in seat to really learn the traditions and the history of Northwest and really the importance it plays in this part of the state. And so it's been a great transition. We're excited to be here in Maryville and really look forward to the future.
It's been a busy, not even 12 months, but about 10, 11 months for the athletic department up there. Darren Lowe retiring from baseball, Ben McCollum going to Drake, and Rich Wright's parting ways with Northwest. So a lot of changes there in the last several months for you. How do you and Andy Peterson work together to continue leading the department forward? Because those are pretty big changes, especially when it comes to the men's basketball and football programs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are very prominent individuals within our athletic department that you named. And we certainly, wish each of them the very best in the next chapter of their lives. I think it really began with Andy and I sitting down and talking about what our guiding principles would be in terms of how we lead the athletic department. Andy and I both have a very strong foundation on the student athlete experience. For us, students come to Northwest to be students first and then to participate in athletics. So that was really the beginning of the conversation. I think from there it was about strategic vision. Where did we want to take Northwest from an athletic standpoint? How could we be good partners within the MIAA? How could we be contributing partners to the MIAA? And then, the competitiveness of it. I think all of athletics leads to that question. How competitive you want to be? What investments do you need to make in athletics? How do you need to position yourselves within the conference, within the region to be competitive? And so from there, Andy put together some strategic objectives that we worked through. He and I, obviously, we talk a lot. The last probably 2 to 3 months are in your statement, you talked about the last 10. We spent a lot of time together talking about, what would be the next step for us in terms of how we replaced these positions. I think each coach that you mentioned had a very unique perspective on how to run their athletic programs. And so all of this comes back to the idea of continuing and reinforcing the expectations of winning at Northwest. It was probably the first thing that really became very apparent to me, that the fan base at Northwest has a very deep passion for what goes on here. It hasn't always been that way. I always tease Coach Churchma that he really began this high level of expectation, and our job is to try to keep it moving forward.
Dr. Tatum, I know you've been around a lot of successful programs as a faculty member, as an administrator. You arrive at Northwest, and I know you probably did your homework about Northwest before you got there, but there is something magical about the culture and the environment that exists and what athletics means to campus and to the community. It truly is a title town There's an expectation of winning that some would say might be unrealistic. But how, as a leader of a campus that has such a long, storied history of success, how do you manage that as a president?
Yeah, I think right off the bat, I always try to tell people from an outside perspective. I came from the southeast part of the United States. Football is a very important aspect of not only our collegiate life, but the daily lives of individuals. It runs deep, the passions for football. I came from a university that actually won 2 NCAA Division II football titles, 4 NCAA Division II baseball titles, and then football added a NAIA championship back in the 60s. Winning championships is not as easy as Northwest has made it look.
Yes.
It takes an incredible amount of discipline, an incredible amount of organization. Every part of the program has to be hitting on all cylinders. I think that when you talk about Northwest and the expectations that come with winning national titles, it's there. It's always there. We lived it quite vividly over the last 2 years in our football program. Success, right? Winning seasons are not just what the expectation is. The expectation is to win well enough to get into the tournament, and then to win well enough to get into the finals, and then to win the finals. I always, I try to remind people also that even Coach Churchma, he made it to the final game 7 times and won 3 times. That just tells you how hard it is to win it. Our good friend Troy Caton is now at Valdosta State. He's the athletic director down there. So proud of Troy and what Valdosta State is doing this year in terms of getting themselves back into the championship game. I really think it doesn't just speak to Northwest, Mike. It speaks to the MIAA and the strength that this conference holds from a national perspective. Year in and year out, the MIAA holds a very strong position within the national competitive landscape. And it's not easy. I mean, it takes investment. It takes a commitment to being present within the conference and working every day to try to put yourself into the best possible position to be competitive. So I think it starts with the conversation that Andy and I always have at the beginning of each year. We want the student athlete experience to be as high quality as we can make it. If we hire the right people in the right positions, we resource it the very best that we can, and there are always limitations when you talk about resourcing. We hope the process leads to good outcomes.
Dr. Tatum, one other thing on the part of just the overall athletic department too is Commissioner Racy and I talked about before that a lot of these Division II, the MIAA programs, they're small town, they're small communities. Sure. That adds an extra layer to the difficulty of some of these situations or decisions that have to come down regarding athletics and coaching staffs and everything. How does that part play a role? Because I remember Andy Peterson told me a couple of weeks ago, like you see these coaches at not just at work, but you see them at church, you see them at the grocery store, your kids go to school. It's different than maybe Division I level where it's more that business approach, from the get-go, and there's not that maybe as tight-knit of a feeling that some of these communities like Maryville and Northwest do have.
Yeah, I mean, certainly our head coaches live in this community. They interact with the population in the community. They go to the grocery store, they're at the gas station, they're at church. People know you. They know who you are. They want to talk to you. They want to be engaged with you. I think that as much as it is about relationships, there is a part of this, Chris, that really does find itself into a business conversation. The investment has to be able to have an outcome that we're working toward. First and foremost, we don't hire any coaches. We don't hire any head coaches at Northwest that I don't get a chance to have a conversation with. Even if that conversation is by telephone. When we hired Tony Jandron, I was actually out of the state, and Andy and I, had to work really hard to make sure that I had as much input to that hiring as I had with our basketball coach, Matt Keeley, and then as what I had with our new football coach, with John McMinimus. So, we try to look at the individual. We try to talk about, are they going to be good citizens to this community? Are they going to be good partners with the rest of the university? It is a balancing act. I think there's always a little bit of tension that exists between different parts of the institution. Everybody's kind of fighting and trying to get positioned for the resources that they desperately need to be successful. I think there are times where unfairly athletics is seen as being over-resourced. We try to be very careful about not over-resourcing anyone necessarily, but the fact of the matter is that these coaches are part of our community. They are part of the university community, and we want to hire people that really understand that aspect of their job.
A lot of new up in Northwest here in the last 12 months or so, and you being new to the MIAA as well. Just overall thoughts on what you've seen from the conference as a whole. You touched on a little bit earlier too, just the entire Division II MIAA, but what have you seen so far here during your tenure?
Yeah, I've been extremely pleased with not only Commissioner Racy, but his staff and the forward-looking perspective that they take about where is the MIAA going. I think it would be easy for the conference office, to just kind of sit back and say, we've been really successful in this conference. We want to just hold our position. I think the ever-changing landscape that is occurring in the NCAA has caused us to have to really take a look at, what the future is going to look like for the MIAA. And that's probably been the most gratifying part of my introduction into the MIAA, is the forward-looking perspective that the conference staff has. But I've also been tremendously impressed with the leadership of the institutions and the CEOs that I have a chance to deal with, day in and day out in the conference. I think everyone has the interest of the conference at heart. It is truly a conference that sits at the table and talks about what do we need to do to strengthen our position, what do we need to do to continue leading Division II in this country. One of the things that I did research before coming to Northwest was, from an athletic standpoint, what is the conference like? I mean, I certainly have heard of the MIAA because of my years affiliated with the NCAA. And I think, what I heard initially was this is a conference that has standing in the national conversation of what happens at the Division II level. And so, I've been really, really happy with the way that Commissioner Racy has challenged the CEOs about, where do we take this conference next? But I've also been, really happy with the way he has reacted to our challenge to him about moving the conference forward as well.
I think some of that too, when you look at the conference, and Commissioner Racy I've talked about that as well, is, and we'll get to some of the changing Division I here in a second, but when it comes to even the NIL stuff coming into Division II and the MIAA, trying to be at the forefront of that, because there is that jockeying for position, so to speak, too, between not just universities and programs within each conference, but it's between conferences too a little bit, isn't it?
It is. I would say this. I've never had a conversation with a head coach who is not focused on winning, right? So winning is a big part of what they're trying to achieve. And in doing that, they're always looking for ways in which they can elevate and separate their program from the other conference programs. I think it started with scholarships within the MIAA. I think if you speak to Coach Churchman, he will tell you one of the great early advantages he had was going to a full allotment of scholarships in football. It helped to create depth and an opportunity to redshirt freshmen coming in. That was a tremendous advantage. Then it goes from scholarships to facilities, from facilities to coaching staffs. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle of conversation. I think where we find ourselves now is with NIL. When we hired Coach McManus, we talked a lot about what is that next opportunity for separation that exists at Division II and within the NCAA, and I think that's going to be with NIL. Now it's a different structure in terms of expectation and what we want to do with those dollars, but it is certainly an active conversation that is going on. And as a conference, we have to pay attention to that, because once we get out of Region 3, we are competing with other universities who are also trying to win national titles. And I'm excited about where NIL is going. I'm a little bit concerned about, the toothpaste already getting out of the tube at the Division I level. There's a lot of angst, I think, out there nationally about what this is going to do to college athletics combined with the transfer portal. It really has become something that, 25 years ago, I would not have predicted to have occurred. I joked with Commissioner Racy the last time we had a lunch together that, SMU was just ahead of their time, right? Everything that they got in trouble for has now all of a sudden become part of the competitive landscape of trying to get your program elevated. So, there's a lot going on with NIL. There's a lot going on with the transfer portal, but that's, if you're going to compete in the Division II world in athletics, you've got to just be willing to work with those entities.
President Tatum, one of the things I think that we really take a lot of pride in the MIAA is the level of attendance, fan engagement. When we recruit student athletes, no matter the sport, they know they're going to come and they're going to be playing in front of big crowds,
Yep.
Passionate fans. And, certainly a school like Northwest helps boost the MIAA in our attendance. As a conference, we've led the nation in attendance in men's and women's basketball and football consecutively the last 15 years. Yep. And I'm interested in your thoughts as someone new to Northwest in a leadership role. What's your impression of game day for the Bearcats?
Yeah, it is a very impressive environment. We have guests that come in from outside of Maryville, from outside of the region, and even from outside the state. Everyone that we bring to a game day event, whether it be basketball or football, they always comment on the fan participation and just the sheer numbers. It just is a great environment to be in as you lead into, kickoff or tip-off. The fan base in Maryville is very passionate, and they are very engaged with what's happening in our athletics program. You're going to find folks arriving early in the morning to set up tailgate spots. There are RVs that show up in our Hughes Fieldhouse parking lot, merchandise sales. It truly feels like the type of game environment that you hope you can create around your collegiate program. And so I was really pleased that was not something that we had to build from scratch. But I think it's important that you have to nurture that. You can't lose sight of the things that need to occur that continue to bring fans to your events. And so it starts with ticket prices. It starts with season ticket packages. It starts with how people get into campus, how they are able to find their spot. So I've traveled to other MIAA schools over the last year and a half. Always just really impressed with what game day environments look like at our partner schools within the conference. I've been to Kansas and Nebraska and other schools in Missouri. I think it really truly is something that we take pride in as a conference, in making sure that the fans get a chance to really experience what Division athletics can be.
All right, so let's dive into the whole Division I thing, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to solve this, since I don't know if anybody really knows. Like Dr. Tatum, you said it. I don't know if anybody really knows where this thing's going to go at this point. How do you? I guess it almost has to be reacting, right? For Division II, there's not much proactive stuff you can do. Somewhat you can, right? But at the same time, it's a lot of Division I. What are they going to do? Right. Okay, what do we do after that?
Well, the first thing I would say, Chris, is that the CEOs in the MIAA have had a great set of conversations with Commissioner Racy. And what we've said is that we need to be proactive, right? We don't need to necessarily sit back and wait on having Division I outcomes impact what we will or will not be able to do at the Division II level. And so we've already started having conversations about what does the MIAA look like in 3 to 5 years? What do we need to do in terms of positioning ourselves? Is it expansion of our base? Is it something that talks about a partnership with other conferences, whether they be regional or national? And I think that Commissioner Racy has done an excellent job through the Football Alliance group to really start those conversations on a national level, at least as it pertains to football. I'll tell you this, I became the faculty athletic representative to the NCAA at Troy in 2000. And I remember early engagements with the NCAA at that time, the office. And I think what you really experienced was an office staff who really took charge of every conversation that you were engaged with them. In other words, there was a bravado that they walked around with that, we are the NCAA. If you want to be a member of this association, you will follow the rules. You will play by the expectations. I left my faculty athletic role in 2008. I actually re-entered the NCAA governance work probably in 2022. I was appointed as a member of the Division I Committee on Academics. The entire personality of the NCAA staff had changed. And Mike and I have talked about this. They were much more, they were a little softer in terms of their willingness to kind of work through problems where in the past it was, kind of our way or the highway approach. At least that's how I saw it. They were much more willing to talk about, well, what can we do to create solutions that satisfies the membership? I think we've always talked about how the money affiliated with the Power Four conferences was going to influence what happened in Division I, particularly with football and basketball. The NCAA basketball television contract has been a real powerhouse from the day that it began. It really dictated a lot of what we had to do in as it relates to NCAA structure and payout and those kind of things. Now that we're in a world where it looks as though every assumption on amateurism is being tested, I think we all wonder, will it survive? I think there's a lot of folks across the United States, both at the state level and the federal level, who are trying to figure out if the NCAA is going to survive as it has been, created. There's lots of talk about breakaways. I think from a Division II standpoint, we are certainly interested in what has occurred over the last probably 18 months as it relates to the NIL case and the settlement, whether student athletes were going to be categorized as employees or not. The trickle-down effect is certainly there. But I think we're all still waiting to see if football is going to break away completely and become an independent entity and not be a part of the NCAA, or is the NCAA going to restructure in such a way that it changes all the classifications and changes the landscape across the country on what conference affiliation looks like?
President Tatum, one thing that we've talked about, you and I, and then the broader group of university presidents in the MIAA, is that it doesn't seem that the current structure that was put in place 50 years ago and done at a time when the NCAA maybe had 600 schools instead of 1,100 that it has now, it doesn't seem like that current structure is really set up to provide the appropriate organization in a new world where you're going to have schools that are looking more and more like a professional and business model, and then a whole bunch of schools that are trying to maintain this alignment with our educational mission. Yep. And I'm interested in your thoughts on, if the current structure won't work, what does that new structure need to look like that better serves 1,100 member schools?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, Mike. So from my previous experience, the university I worked for, Troy University, made the decision in the late 1990s to move to Division I. And that process began somewhere in the 1996 timeframe. And so the question is why? Why would Troy make that jump given the success that they had at Division II? I think at the end of the day, it really talks about the opportunity to gain revenue to support a more national platform, right? To be able to play in bowl games. And so that mindset that really occurred, I guess the final evolutionary step of that occurred in the early 2000s when Troy joined the Sun Belt, was that they were now going to they would have the opportunity to play in postseason championships or play in bowl game scenarios that you don't really have at the Division II level. But with that came an enormous investment. And I think that's where all of this is starting to catch up with schools that are not able to compete at that upper tier Division I level. When you talk about an NIL budget at a Power Four conference reaching the $20 million mark. I mean, that's more like a professional sports program than it is an amateur program. And so I think you've got a host of institutions who made that jump to Division I, who are playing in conferences where they find themselves really struggling to be able to pay the expense that it takes to just compete at that level. I mean, travel alone, conferences have gotten spread across the country. If you're in Conference USA right now, which again was kind of the holy grail of most majors back in the 2000s, early 2000s, they're stretched from East Coast to West Coast. How do you afford to send your baseball team, your volleyball team, your soccer programs, your tennis programs across country to compete? And so I think the structure as it stands right now is going to have to be revisited. I think it's hard for a university president at a mid-major to go to their board or to go to their fan base and say, we need to move down. I mean, that's just not a conversation I think that they're willing to have. So I think it's really imperative on the NCAA to open up this conversation about what would a new structure look like? Could we combine parts of Division II and parts of Division I to create a new classification? Because even within Division II, there's a broad separation between those schools that invest heavily at the upper tier of Division II and those that are not really interested in competing in football, so to speak. So I think the time is coming. I'm really interested in January's NCAA convention to hear what the Division II leadership is open to, right? Are they willing to open up a conversation about a total restructure? I think it goes back to, is there a conference or a convention of conference schools to come in and to really rebuild the constitution of the NCAA and figure out, is amateurism something that we're going to be able to hang on to? Or do we go to a model where perhaps we play outside of the NCAA structure in certain sports, even all the way down into the Division II level?
It changes the hard part of all of this, right? It's been the same for so long, and probably for coaches too. Old school coaching, new school coaching. The new school embraces social media, embraces all this stuff. Is that going to be maybe one of the sticking points in your opinion too? Is some may say we can save it. Others are like, no, let's just blow the whole thing up and we'll try again. But there's got to be something probably in the middle of all that, isn't there? Where it's probably going to be, we can't save it completely, but there's something still there that can be saved for the NCAA.
Yeah, I think that's most likely the case, Chris. I think that's where we, as the MIAA, want to be leaders in that conversation. Right? We want our conference to be out front to help lead that conversation and to shape that conversation. Even within Division II, there are the haves and the have-nots. I hate to use that term, but we find ourselves at times at odds with our fellow conferences who are not interested in investing in certain top tier sports, right? They don't want the rules to change that may help give advantages to conferences that play football as those that don't play football. So I think that what's going to happen is you're going to have two polarizing groups, those that want no change and those that want to totally blow up what is currently in place. But I think the real work is going to be done in the middle, right? It's going to be the level-headed CEOs and conference commissioners who come together and say, what are we trying to achieve? What is the true experience that we're trying to build for students? And if it involves, pulling pieces out in order to preserve another core segment of that, then I think that's something I'm certainly willing to have that conversation. I don't personally want the NCAA to be disbanded, right? I think there is value in a collectiveness that occurs across this country in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the student athlete experience. But, I certainly would believe that there will be a group of people that want to scrap it all, start over, and then those who don't want anything to change. I think the danger, though, is if we don't evolve, then we're going to have to deal with the consequences that comes from not wanting to engage in that side of the conversation.
I think that's a good point, Chris. I would add that, the change piece is hard, but the financial realities are going to make it necessary. Yeah. There's the model that we're drifting into with a much more, you got Bill Belichick being hired at North Carolina, and the first thing he does is hires a general manager,
Yeah.
to manage his roster.
Yeah.
That's a professional. We're drifting into a model that can't be sustained financially. And at the end of the day, not enough people are stepping back and saying, hey, this is higher education.
Yeah.
We're not in the entertainment business.
Yep.
We're in the education business. And if we can't sustain costs to pretend to be Division I, we need a different structure, a different model to figure out how to make this operational. Now, I'm so proud of the schools in the MIAA. We have 10 or more schools in the MIAA that could be at Division I, struggling to try to figure out how do we sustain this? How do we make it work? Fortunately, we've had schools in the MIAA that have realized Division II is the place that we can be prudent with our resources and compete for national championships. And that's the model that we need to figure out how we can grow and make bigger for more schools that look like the regional public universities that are part of the MIAA.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It kind of leads into, this current situation about championships and how we're structured, right? I think that is a little bit frustrating for MIAA schools who find themselves in the first round of the championships, right? Whether it be basketball, baseball, whatever, and we're competing against the same schools that we have been battling with the entire season. And as a leading conference in this country, when you put us against each other, you are eliminating levels of opportunity for student athletes to move beyond that first and second round. I think a conversation we really are driving the NCAA to have at the Division II level is postseason playoff structure. There is a way in which we can make that more competitive from a national perspective, but still operate within a budget structure that we can accommodate. So I think there's a lot there that gets discussed between what is now, what can we do to make a kind of a transitional plan, and then what's the final plan that we have to work toward.
And you bring up the championship structure, and Commissioner Racy and I've talked about that a lot, President Tatum, that a lot of unhappiness with how the regions are put together. And it's, well, if you lose one game in football in this region, you probably don't have a chance at that point.
Right.
Maybe two, but better luck next year.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's the thing there too. And you brought up the budget part of it. Is that, in your opinion, the biggest sticking point there? Is maybe what the NCAA is looking at is financially, do we want to take that risk of what happens if some of these schools can't do this? But that would come down back to the NCAA to figure that out too, though, right? To make sure that schools were able to afford the cost if they were able to make a run like that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the NCAA budget for championships. And so if you look at the total budget for Division II and the percentage of that budget that is being spent on postseason championships, I think you see a disparity about what's being spent in other divisions, right? There's less money going to the championship travel support and other aspects of that in Division II than occurs at Division I and Division III. What we're asking for is to be treated equitably, right? And so the budget, and Mike, if I misspeak, you'll have to correct me here, but the budget is built on a 3-year cycle. And so we have really pressed this question over the last 12 to 18 months with the NCAA about, why can't we get in there and make some adjustments to make the postseason travel more equitable and resource it in a way that we could push some teams out of region in order to play in the first couple of rounds. I think we're starting to make some headway. I think that question finally has risen to the point of being considered that, maybe we really need to do that. And that comes from a direct impact that Commissioner Racy is having, that our ADs are having on represented on the management committee and on the task force that was created last year for Division II. So, some of it, Chris, goes back to just change, right? It's change again. People don't always embrace this idea of change, but I've been pleased, at least over the last year, that they've been more willing to at least accept this conversation or this question about changing the budget so that we can do something a little bit different in postseason championship structure.
President Tatum, get you out of here on this question. We'll make you do a hypothetical.
Right.
NCAA 3 to 5 years from now.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Commissioner Racy talking about it 4 years ago. What's this going to look like? And there's been a lot of stuff unraveling. But 3 to 5 years from now, what does the NCAA maybe look like at that point?
Yeah, that probably is the trickiest question to answer right now, because I don't know that anybody has a sense of what it's going to look like. Now, what we hope it looks like, right? I think that's the other question. What I hope it looks like is I hope it looks like an association that really does support this idea of amateurism and student athlete experience. And that's going to be different today than it was 25 years ago. I mean, some of the issues we're facing today is because of the legislation that was passed years ago that significantly restricted how universities could support their student athletes, right? I mean, I can remember times where we had student athletes who had a parent who was, who passed away or who was severely ill, and they couldn't get back home. And there was a point in time where we could not help them financially to do that. We had recruited them across the country to play at our school, and now they couldn't get back. I mean, they couldn't have money to do basic necessities of their laundry or having an extra meal. I mean, those were things that were so restrictive that it began to drive a conversation into a dangerous place. I will tell you this. I think that the situation is not going to be rectified at the state level, right? Because the states that are deeply invested in the success of their flagship universities are never going to let another state get the advantage on them. And so I think a lot of this is going to be driven to a more federal level. And how do we deal with, it goes back really to the 1960s and the 1950s on civil rights, right? States were not really willing to do certain things. So the federal government came in and said, well, here's the floor, right? You're at least going to have to do these things. I don't want to compare athletics to the civil rights movement, but I do think that if we continue to let states make decisions on amateurism definitions, on NIL definitions, on employee definitions, we're never going to get this resolved on a national level. So my hope is that we can find the right mixture of state and federal legislation and guidelines that give us a platform where student athletes can compete. You go back to your Division I question earlier. Now that they've restricted roster sizes, right? There are certain aspects of Division I for student athlete experiences that are not going to be achieved anymore. The era of walk-ons at Division I is going to be significantly impacted. Now, that may be a big advantage for Division II, right? We've already, as an institution, fielded visits and calls from student athletes from around the Midwest who, in tennis, in track and field, and in baseball, who have been told there won't be a spot for you next year on the roster. So if you want to continue to play collegiate athletics, you're going to have to go someplace else. And so, my hope is that in 3 to 5 years, we have found some balance that allows us to create some sustainability to the collegiate athletic model. Whatever that looks like, I think that's up for debate right now.
A lot of tough decisions. The conversation's going to have to be had the next 3 to 5 years before that, after that, and I don't think we're done with this anytime soon either. So,
No.
Hey, Commissioner Racy,
that's the great joy of this, right? If you have a sport interest, this is as good of sports talk radio topics as you're going to get, right?
I was going to say, it keeps Commissioner Racy and I going for a while.
It does. It really does.
For 4 years.
Yeah. And you talk to 10 different people, you get 10 different perspectives on this, right? No one has the total answer. Everyone has an opinion on what they'd like to see. That's where I think the MIAA is going to have its greatest opportunity to contribute to that conversation. And that is because, we do have standing in the NCAA. We do have a seat at the table in this conversation. And I'm just really proud to be a part of a group that is going to have a chance to impact what happens next.
President Tatum, appreciate the time today. Commissioner Racy, thank you as always. Hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, because we'll take a little bit of a break here too, and we'll come back with more conversations. Maybe Dr. Tatum will join us afterward, depending on, I guess, the reviews he gets on this one.
Yeah, I may be one and done. You never know.
Yeah.
No, I guarantee you will not. And we thank you, Dr. Tatum, for joining us. It's a pleasure to work with you, and we've got a great group of presidents leading all of our schools. And Chris, we appreciate what you do for the MIAA and providing us this platform where we can catch up and talk about everything going on in the MIAA and the NCAA. So thank you.
Appreciate it, guys. And we'll do more sports talk radio in the new year too.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Happy holidays.
Thank you.